Hey everybody, Theoretical Bullshit here once again. I didn't really plan this one out. I just sort of thought that maybe if I turned the camera on and started ranting, ultimately a thought coherent enough would be formulated. So anyway, I want to talk about, I started to think about God and God's existence, hypothetically, from a Christian theological perspective, God's existence before the creation, before anything else existed. From discussing this with different Christians, and getting different views on it, the consensus seems to be that before anything else existed, God was the sum of existence. God could be defined as existence. God was the mean, median, and mode of all there was. There was nothing but God. There was nothing, and God was that nothing. And so you've got this, and God was never physical, right? So it's not like there was like a little old man with a beard, floating around in a sea of nothingness. Like God was, still a spirit, and thus non-physical or metaphysical. I started thinking about what kind of existence that is. Because here you've got this being that just exists. It's got consciousness, it's got needs and wants and desires and thoughts and feelings. It has an awareness. You've got this thing, this being that exists. And this being had no choice in the matter of its own existence. God couldn't choose to go from nothing to something, because to make a choice is the product of something and not nothing, and God always existed. So there was never a point at which God could decide to exist. So against, or at least independently of God's will, God exists. I'm not even going to call the being God, because if I were, it would be more of a name than a description, because in a reality in which nothing else exists, it would be nonsensical to say that God was a god of anything at all, especially when you're the mean, median, and mode of all of existence. You'd be impeccably and unequivocally average. But you've got this thing, and it exists, and it's got all these attributes for no apparent reason and with no apparent cause. It's just there. So here you've got God, and he's got all these like really interesting attributes, like being morally perfect. Well, that's just confusing to me. It seems somewhat ridiculous, considering that there's no other consciousness in existence for this being to have any moral impact on whatsoever. It's very difficult to be like jealous and merciful when there's no one to envy or spare. I don't know, maybe the moral perfection came in when the creation began to exist, because otherwise I just can't see being morally perfect having any meaning at all. So maybe God wasn't moral or immoral, but amoral, and then once he created something, he created morality as well. That's one theory. So you've got moral perfection, and then you've got omniscience, and you've got omnipotence, and transcendence. That's a kicker for me. Being transcendent. Of course, when nothing else exists, it's very difficult to transcend anything at all. Nothing needs to be transcended. So I think that's more of a reference in relation to once the creation had been created, us, and the earth and universe and matter and energy and things like that. But one of those attributes, and it's not really anywhere in the Bible, but Christians will say that God transcends time. God is outside and above time. And that's one that I just can't get my head around. Because realistically speaking, what is time? A non-spatial continuum in which events occur in an apparently irreversible order. I read that in a dictionary somewhere. But time, all time is a measurement, is our measurement. It doesn't actually exist. Time isn't a thing. It doesn't even govern things. It's actually governed by things. All time is a measurement of motion, a measurement of sequence, of progress, of change. Without motion, without sequence, without change, time doesn't exist, because everything would be the same moment. If you took the entire universe and you froze it solid, down to the molecule, down to the atom, and nothing moved, including consciousness and thoughts and just removed all sequence whatsoever, so that there is no difference between one moment and the next, then you will have eliminated time, because there's no difference of moments. It's all one moment. If you're a being that's existing for an eternity, never came into existence, will never leave existence, and you are transcendent of time, that means you can't have a conscious thought. You can't think, oh, I'm going to create something, because there's a beginning and a middle and an end to that thought, and thus time applies to you. And I love it when people say, well, no, God's just outside of time, but there's no such, time isn't a place. It's not like a bubble that you can just leave or walk out of. All time is a description. It's something, it doesn't exist. It's something we use to describe when progress happens, when motion happens, when there's a difference between moments. And so for God to have the thought, I'm going to create something, or I want to create something, or I think I'm going to create something, then he is, what's the word? Subject to time. And so for God to truly exist transcendentally or independently or outside of time, for God to truly not have time apply to him, God would have to not have consciousness. I mean, that's all there is to it. God would have to not have thoughts and not have feelings or opinions, or because all of those have a sequence to them. All of the, I'm going to create a world in 6 days and rest on the seventh day. That's a thought. There's a beginning and a middle and an end to that. So literally, truly, for God to transcend time, or to exist independently of time, God would have to be, in a way, brain dead. And so if you were to think of, the universe and all the dwellings therein and everything that goes on, if you were to think of that as like a movie, right? Because you've got time and space. All right, think of time and space together, because time and space makes everything. If you were to think of time and space as a movie, then taking away time would be like taking that movie and turning it into a snapshot rather than a movie. It's a still frame, because there's no difference. If you look at a snapshot, there's no difference between one moment and another. There's no, 22 frames per second or whatever it is. It's just one frame, one moment. So that would be like the universe without time. Now if you took away, and that would be like God without time, except God goes one step further. God's not physical either. God doesn't have an image either. So if you took that photograph that we now have, and you took away the photograph, because there's nothing to look at, there's no actual image or anything physical there anyway, you took away the photograph, all you have left is, well, nothing. So if God is truly transcendent of time and space, you ever notice that God then has the exact same attributes as nothing does? God is synonymous with nothing. And I just find that really interesting. So therein lies, a dilemma. So I would have to argue that if I were a Christian, at least, theologically speaking, either you got to give one of them up. Either God doesn't exist, or God exists but is subject to time, is not transcendent of time, because, like I said, you can't transcend time and still have consciousness, because consciousness has a beginning and a middle and an end, and therefore you're subject to time. So that's what I'm thinking. That's my rambling, self-indulgent, presumptuous rant about God. Thoughts, questions, comments, complaints, grievances. Video posts would be preferable. So tell me what you think. What do you guys think, world? Am I crazy? Am I onto something? What's the deal? Take care.